Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us on Velayat News. I'm Abroo Sabzwari, and now to the top headlines for today. U.S. prepares to arm Syrian insurgents to shift the balance of power. Police in Brazil fired tear gas in clashes with protesters. Bombs tore through coffee shops in Iraq, leaving 22 dead and a dozen others injured. Saudis hold massive funeral for activists killed by regime forces. The U.S. suspends trade benefits for Bangladesh for safety measures. And now, the news in detail. U.S. President Barack Obama has authorized a covert CIA program to arm foreign-backed militants in Syria in a bid to achieve advance on the ground against the government forces. The Wall Street Journal quoted diplomats and U.S. officials as saying the CIA has begun moving weapons to Jordan from a network of secret warehouses and plans to start arming small groups of vetted militants. Under the CIA program, the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and key allies would provide both light arms and some heavier weapons to moderate militants loyal to General Salim Idris, the top commander of the Syrian militants. The diplomats and U.S. officials said that Washington plans to provide training, small arms, ammunition, and possibly certain types of anti-tank missiles. Saudi Arabia and other countries plan to provide anti-aircraft weapons on a small scale to ensure their use is closely monitored. U.S. and Saudi officials believe it will take months of arming and training before there are enough moderate fighters on the battlefield to make a meaningful difference on the ground against the Syrian government. Obama's decision follows urgent appeals by Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and other allies for the U.S. administration to take a more hands-on role. Police in Brazil have fired tear gas in clashes with protesters in the northeastern city of Fortaleza, where Spain and Italy played their semi-final football match. Around 5,000 protesters marched near Castelão Stadium in the city. At least one protester and one policeman were reportedly injured as protesters hurled rocks and tried to smash through barriers set up near the stadium. On Wednesday, Brazilian police clashed with protesters just hundreds of meters away from the Mineiro Stadium in the city of Belo Horizonte, where Brazil's football team was playing against Uruguay in a semifinal match of a warm-up tournament for the 2014 World Cup. The protests erupted on June 11th when people in Sao Paulo took to the streets to condemn a price hike in public transport. The unrest spread quickly across the country as protesters also voiced their anger over the high cost of the World Cup, poor public service, and political corruption. On several occasions, Brazilian police resorted to tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the protesters. In a bid to end the unrest, Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff pledged on June 21st to improve public services and to fight harder against widespread corruption in the country. However, Brazilians were not swayed by her proposed reforms, as new demonstrations have since been staged. Protest organizers have vowed to continue demonstrations until concrete steps are taken to reform the political system, as numerous social media call for general strike on July 1st. A series of bombings targeting football fans has hit coffee shops in Baghdad and towns around the Iraqi capital, killing at least 22 people and injuring a dozen others. In North and South Baghdad, 2 bomb blasts killed 8 people in the coffee shops where scores of young men had gathered to watch a soccer match between Real Madrid and Barcelona. In the city of Baquba, some 50 kilometers northeast of Baghdad, 2 other bombings killed 10 football fans in cafes. In the town of Jabela, about 65 kilometers south of the capital, a bomb detonated in a cafe, leaving 3 people dead. And in Iskandaria, 40 kilometers south of Baghdad, a bomb attached to a car exploded, killing 1 civilian. The incidents are the latest in a string of attacks across Iraq that have left more than 2,000 people dead since the beginning of April. Tens of thousands of people in Saudi Arabia have attended the funeral of 2 activists who were killed by regime forces in the country's eastern province. The funerals were held in the town of Awamiya and the Qatif region on Wednesday. The mourners slammed the regime's deadly crackdown on the country's uprising and chanted slogans against the ruling Al Saud family. On June 23rd, Saudi police opened fire at and seriously injured Morsi Ali Ibrahim al-Rabah when trying to arrest him over allegations of involvement in anti-regime protests. Rabah, who was on a list of 23 activists wanted in connection with protests in Awamiya, died of his injuries at the hospital. He was the 18th victim of the Saudi crackdown on the protesters in Qatif since 2011. On June 21st, regime forces also killed a teenager during a raid on the houses of anti-regime activists in the village of Al-Tubi in Qatif. Police shot the 19-year-old in the head and shoulder. In Saudi Arabia, protests and political gatherings of any kind are prohibited. Many political prisoners are held in detention across Saudi Arabia. The families and relatives of political prisoners have held several public gatherings in major cities, including Riyadh, Mecca, Medina, and Buraidah. Since February 2011, protesters have held demonstrations on an almost regular basis in Saudi Arabia, mainly in Qatif and Awamiya, primarily calling for the release of all political prisoners, freedom of expression and assembly, and an end to widespread discrimination. According to Human Rights Watch, the Saudi regime has routinely represses expression critical of the government. President Barack Obama has cut off long-time U.S. trade benefits for Bangladesh in a symbolic response to dangerous conditions in the country's garment industry that have cost more than 1,200 lives in the past year. President Obama stated that he has determined it is appropriate to suspend Bangladesh because it is not taking steps to afford internationally recognized worker rights to workers in the country. The U.S. sanction does not directly affect Bangladesh's multi-billion-dollar clothing exports to the U.S., which came under scrutiny after the collapse of the Rana Plaza garment factory building in April that killed 1,129 people, and the Tazreen factory fire in November that killed 112. But it could influence the European Union to take similar action, which could have a much bigger impact on Bangladesh and its garment sector. U.S. Trade Representative Michael Froman told reporters that this was not a decision taken lightly, and added that our goal is not only to see Bangladesh restore its eligibility for trade benefits, but to see Bangladeshi workers in safe, appropriate work situations. Richard Trumka, president of the AFL-CIO Labor Federation, said the decision sent an important message to countries that receive duty-free access to the U.S. market under the Generalized System of Preference GSP program. Trumka stated that countries that tolerate dangerous and even deadly working conditions and deny basic workers' freedoms rights, especially the right to freedom of association, will risk losing preferential access to the U.S. market. Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Robert Menendez said no one will want to wear clothing that is made in Bangladesh if it is made on the blood of workers. And that brings us to the end of our bulletin today. If you'd like to contribute your community's news, you can email us at news@VelayatTV.org. You can also get the latest headlines and more by logging on to our website, VelayatTV.org, or follow us on our YouTube and Facebook pages, Velayat TV USA. Many thanks for joining us. Till next time, I'm Abroo Sabzwari.